This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon. This is the Clatsop County Comprehensive Plan Update Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee meeting for September 17, 2020. It is 2 p.m. I'll quickly call the meeting to order and then just do introductions. I'll call folks' names off as I see them on our screen or on my screen so that we can get the order. My name. Thank you, Todd. My name is Andy Davis. I live in Astoria. I'm the chair of the Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee. Jim, you're the next one on my screen. Jim Allegria. But Jim is moving extremely slowly. Let's try Jan Mitchell. Can you introduce yourself?
Jan Mitchell, I live in Astoria, and I'm the vice chair of this committee.
Jan. I am getting a pretty good amount of feedback from Harold. Harold, I think it's from Harold.
Hi.
Hi, Harold.
Hey.
Can you introduce yourself quickly?
Harold Gable, member of this committee. It's nice to meet, even virtually.
Thank you for being here, Harold. How about Pat Corcoran?
Hello, I'm Pat Corcoran. I live in Astoria, and I'm a member of the Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Pat. Todd Lundy, are you available? I'm not sure Todd hears me. How about Robert?
Hello, I'm Robert Strickland, a resident of Clatsop Plains.
Thank you, Robert. Let's see, there is a, maybe is Suzanne, is that you that is the S showing up on my screen?
It says Suzette.
Okay. And I don't see anyone else. Am I missing anyone that I'm just not seeing?
Nancy Ferber was here briefly, and she seems to have dropped out. We also have Monica Steele, Assistant County Manager.
Thank you. I was sort of skipping over staff and hoping you could introduce yourselves. I did just get a message from Cheryl Johnson, who is a member, and she said she's having a little trouble getting into or in past the starting screen. Jim Allegria, welcome back. Can you introduce yourself? Not sure Jim can hear me either. Though I think I just heard a heavy sigh from him. Todd Lundy, do you hear me? I'm not seeing anything from any reaction from Todd either. Okay. Well, we will just move on, knowing that those two are here and hoping that they can work out any audio issues. Meeting summaries. Did anyone have any corrections or additions to the meeting summaries from last two meetings? Because there were two attached to the agenda for today, for either July 16 or August 20. I did read through them and didn't see anything completely out of place to my eye anyway.
I didn't either. And in fact, I thought they were very succinct summaries of the conversation. I was impressed by that.
Yep. So without objection, we'll accept the meeting summaries from the last two meetings. Okay, hearing no objection. Thank you, Gail, for providing those summaries. I think they did a good job, as Pat said, of capturing what we were talking about. in a reasonably succinct way, given how much we've covered. CAC liaison reports. Do we have Robert? Can you give a report from the Clatsop Plains?
I can try. It seemed like people's minds were off in the Bernie areas of the state. Like one of our members was out taking care of animals that needed to be moved. And it just seemed like that was the background importance. We had some attempt at clarification of what to call the Chinook Indian Nation, and I think it didn't really clarify particularly. It was that often what their desire was that when we show something that sounds like Clatsop Chinook in our Clatsop County notes, that they would like for there to be 2 words there that say Clatsop Chinook. No hyphenation, no slash. This does not get into what is the official name of their legal entity, headquartered at Bay Center, Washington. It does not get into in what circumstances, but it gets into a lot of things that are hard to keep up with. That yes, there were tribes, there were bands, there were tribes and bands. I know Todd had a good question that came up as far as points of reference. There were folks in this area who were involved in Lewis and Clark Centennial activities, where the sovereign Chinook Nation was not made the host organization. So the best I could do was search the Daily Astorian for what's the relationship between these different entities. And it was one of them was saying, "Oh, we don't have a problem with them," and the Chinook Nation noted that, well, 300 members of this Clatsop County other entity are enrolled members of the Chinook Nation. So I'm just saying that there's more complexity there than I think we need to fret with, and Jan has some input here, I think.
Sure, Jan.
I'm not sure this is the place on the agenda to deal with it, but I have more experience with this than I wish I did somehow. I mean, I was the chair of the bicentennial group, and so I have lots of history, and I intended to talk about some of this when we get to actually talking about history and culture. But I would just say that there had been, well, no, I won't go into it now, because I think I can only need to go into it once, and we can do that later. But I can unravel a lot of that. I can try to be separate from it, but I did live through it, and I was the chair of a 2-state, 2 non-recognized tribal group.
Thank you, Jan.
The What else? I think there was a sense at our Clatsop Plains meeting of the chair not wanting to rush through the map of county-owned properties and kind of wanting more time to look at it. I was kind of a nuisance saying, hey, there aren't that many. Just look at the stupid map and we'll work our way from north to south. So I think that did involve us a lot, and I was grateful. I think we were all grateful that Gail had gotten to us a map, that let us see what was county owned through the Clatsop Plains. And there were pieces that where I wondered what protections there existed in reality. Like there was a little piece, none of the, our focus was not on those that were already designated as parklands, but maybe a little strip of county-owned land that was the only really easy piece to get to Smith Lake, just as an example. So there's all kinds of weird issues about, because I used to be on the Recreational Lands Committee, and who owns the bottom of Smith Lake? Do we go along with the idea that Department of State Lands does because it's submerged and submersible? Or is this one of those things where, oh, just don't get into it? That the people around the shores have been very protective of it. It's kind of like down at Sunset Lake, where kind of the old record said, oh, we all owned the middle of the lake. So there are these kind of undealt with things where you have to be a real geek to deal with it. That no evidence that Department of State Lands really wants to get in and get involved. But there are quite a few, and when I say quite a few, a dozen nice pieces of county-owned land that appear to be where we'd like to have them stay county-owned. The little strips next to water. There's a piece right behind Monica's house. Don't know what it is, but it's one of those things where obviously there are dead Indians there, but it's not highlighted. And this also we got into of, gee, the Indians, which call themselves Indians, so I'm just calling them Indians, would like to know where all the protected Indian locations are in the county. And yet this is highly protected to avoid people going and digging up and peddling skulls and beads. So planning gets into the funny role of saying, well, gee, we'll try to find out about that. But knowing what they're asking about is highly protected because they don't want to make it a public issue. So anyway, this all seemed to be of real interest, but it's some of those unanswerable questions. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Robert. I think especially that last question is an interesting one for us to maybe talk about in a couple other points today too. what groups or people might benefit from what's labeled as the archaeological sites in the rest of the document, and who needs to know it. And obviously there's some reason to keep it sort of under wraps too, but yeah, there's some maybe discussion around that. Cheryl, I see that you've joined us. Welcome. I'll ask you to introduce yourself in a minute because your report is going to come up. Jim, does your audio work now? Is that
yes?
Okay.
Yes, I finally found like the fourth way to turn the audio on or off.
Great. Welcome to our audio world. Can you introduce yourself really quickly?
Yes, I'm Jim Allegria, and I'm on the Countywide Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Jim. Gail, did we have a Elsie Jewell CAC meeting this time around?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please, Andy? I missed that.
Sure. Did we have an Elsie Jewell Seaside Rural CAC meeting this time around?
They are meeting at 5 o'clock tonight, so I'm actually going to ask this group to wrap up their discussions by no later than 4:50.
Okay, thank you for letting us know about that.
Yeah.
How about Lewis and Clark? Do we have a report from Lewis and Clark?
Yes, they met in July, August. Their next meeting on the historic and cultural resources will be next Thursday at 6 p.m. So they're meeting. They're the last group to meet. And so when they met in August, they had their discussion about wetlands, and there was quite an interesting discussion about whether or not we should be using the statewide inventory or the national wetlands inventory instead of requiring everybody to get an actual on-the-ground delineation and have it approved by Department of State Lands. And there was not a consensus or a solution to that problem, but there was a lot of discussion about how using a tool that's not 100% accurate can affect property development.
Okay. Thank you for that. So Northeast CAC, Cheryl, can you report from your CAC and introduce yourself as well?
Cheryl Johnson, Northeast CAC, and then the rep to the countywide one. Our group met last week, and positive and productive work. We're able to work through the worksheets that Gail had given us. In historic resource policies, there were 2 of them, policy 4, that specifically referred to a location in our area, which was the Shepherd and Morris Sawmill in Westport, and we are in favor of retaining that goal. Policy 6 refers to the Westport Log Tunnel, which is in our area, and we are in favor of retaining that goal. We looked at cultural resource policies. We support the wording suggested from the Chinook Nation for them to be included and for that wording to be more appropriate. And then with the recognition that there are additional tribes in our area, including the Clatsop Nehalem, and I will be interested to hear what Jan has to add to our conversation when we get farther down. And under historic resource policies, we appreciated that Gail and staff had given us suggestions, and she had mentioned Bradwood and Clifton, and we are in favor of exploring whether or not there's enough information and whether or not those can be significant sites. The other one that we suggested to possibly be included was the Swenson Cemetery, which is maintained by the Finnish Brotherhood. And then in cultural policies, we support the wording on both of those suggestions. And we had also wondered that in our county, that in historic and cultural resources, We're not seeing any reference to Scandinavian history or culture, and we're not seeing any reference to Chinese history and culture. So we weren't sure if that was because those areas were possibly within the incorporated areas, Astoria, Seaside, or indeed they had possibly been overlooked. We appreciate that Goal 5 is being chopped up into small bite-sized pieces. Simultaneously, we are concerned that we've had 6 months added to this already very long process. So both of those concerns simultaneously. And I think that's all from us.
Thank you, Cheryl. And then Todd, I know you were on. We couldn't hear from you earlier. I'm not sure you heard from us either. Are you able to report Southwest Coastal?
Well, it kind of goes on and off. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, great. Okay. Yes, we met on the 9th of September. We reviewed policies listed in the historic sites and cultural places. And I do have a list of our recommendations. But before that, we wanted to add, well, I'll follow the same process that we had just now with Cheryl. So we went through our policies and came up with the following recommendations. Cheryl, some of this is out of our ignorance, so it kind of goes in contradiction to what you just said, but policy 1 pertains to Ecola Park, and we wish to retain that support for funding, to support a funding stream. Policy 2 may also support a funding stream, and we don't know, so we'll retain it until we know whether it's still active or not. Policy 3, again, may be completed, but we don't know for sure, and so we would retain policy 3. 4 and 5 appear to be completed, and so should be deleted. That's our recommendation. Policy 6 should be revised to include the entire list of 60 sites inventoried. Policy 7 should clearly say how the county is to protect the sites and retain them. Then regarding cultural issues, well, first off, with regard to historical sites, the attitude in our group was generally that since this policy was done 40 years ago, these items should have been completed. And so unless we decide that they're not completed, they should probably be deleted, as already been done. And then we discussed procedures by which individuals could add to the inventory. And we decided that both citizens advisories committees, which is now the sole way of getting something added, should be augmented by saying that any individual member of the public could suggest an item be added. Now that leaves it pretty vague because who makes the final decision is not clear. Then with regard to the cultural issues, policy 1, only change it to so that it's clear to include all Indian tribes in the region. And policy 2 relates to preservation of uncovered Indian relics and so should be retained. So that's what our committee did. I have a couple observations, if I may. It seems to me when we started this process, the committee was, this committee was put together to adopt recommendations from the smaller committees, the district committees. And as such, it would seem to me that we might need to change the way we're going about things. We need to do more like what Cheryl did, and that is list the recommendations, and we did list the recommendations by each of these groups, go over them as a group, and then have a final recommendations that we then pass on to staff and for conveyance to the Planning Commission. That's the end of my report.
Okay, thank you, Todd. If I will say, in regards to your last point, my working understanding is that that's what we mostly attempt to do, is combine or give reflection on things that have been brought forward from the regional groups. You know, if there are particular ways that you think we're not holding to that, please let us know through the meeting. You know, I think today anyway, we'll certainly go through the Goal 5 worksheet that staff presented, which contains at least some of that feedback from especially the Clatsop Plains group. And then it looks like also some of the Northeast input is in there as well. But yeah, hold us to account on that, because that is our intention anyway. So I think we're through the liaison reports. So Monica or Gail, do you want to move on to Monica and her presentation at this time?
Yeah, so Monica Steele, the Assistant County Manager, will be giving a brief presentation about the Public Works Resiliency Project.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me come to your meeting. I appreciate it. Hi, Patrick. It's great to see you. And so, Gail, will you be the one flipping the pages just to make sure? Okay. So what this is the county is going through a process, and it's kind of a process that's been several years in the making, and it's regarding the countywide resiliency. And so, Gail, if you'll go ahead and flip the slide. Should a natural disaster occur, it's the county who plays a critical role in countywide emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. And we're responsible for protecting and preserving life and property, as well as coordinating the longer-term rebuilding and recovery efforts. And so there's several county departments as well as community partners who play an essential role in all emergency preparedness and recovery efforts. But for the county, those departments include the assessment and taxation, emergency management, community development, public health, public works, and the sheriff's office. And so the beginnings of the conversations are first mentioned back in 2012 in the county's strategic plan. There's identified a project name that was called a countywide bypass truck evacuation route, where the county, cities of Astoria, Warrenton, and Seaside considered improvements to Highway 101 and the development of an alternate route, earthquake or tsunami evacuation road or bypass. And then in 2015, it was mentioned again as having redundant transportation routes increases the likelihood of maintaining system connectivity during and after such an event. Is therefore an important part of Clatsop County's overall resilience. So then more recently, the Clatsop County Board of Commissioners have prioritized the relocation of essential buildings and infrastructure outside the tsunami inundation zone. And this is in an effort to optimize response during our community's time of need. And so this is not a short-term process. This is a long-term process. As I mentioned, some of these conversations started back in 2012. And so right now, what the county has been working on is the current process. and engaging the public in community outreach to see what the thoughts are on this process. So on the right-hand side of the screen here, you see a map, and I apologize because it's pretty small. And you can also find this map on the website, but it lists some different sites, and then it also lists on the left-hand side the phases of this process. So for phase 1, we're looking at trying to find a location to relocate our public works facility out of the inundation zone. For those of you that aren't familiar with where our public works facility is, it's at 1100 Olney, which is just past Sultanos in Astoria. And the building and everything that's been there has been there for over 100 years. And it serves a purpose, but should we have a Cascadia type event, we would be inundated. And therefore our equipment would not be useful. So if you look at that map, sorry, I'm trying to look at it. You can see the yellow square is where it says acquisition. And that is where there is what's called the sort yard. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, it's out past Fort Clatsop, and it was previously used as a sorting yard, most recently by Westerland Logging. It's currently owned by Warrenton Fiber. And so the county has entered into a purchase sale agreement with Warrenton Fiber for this property. And we have a 6 month due diligence period. And so what that means is we signed that purchase sale agreement, I believe July 30th of 2020. And we have 180 days from that time at no cost to the county to figure out whether or not that would be a good location for our public works facility to relocate to. And when we're looking at relocating, we're looking at a number of factors that would be a good fit for the public works facility, most importantly being out of the inundation zone. In addition, being available for public access, being of adequate size, preferably located on the west side of Lewis and Clark River and Youngs River to eliminate 2 major obstacles in an emergency. Availability of utilities already at the site, avoidance of extensive wetland mitigation, which would increase the associated cost, overall cost to develop a turnkey site, and then just that making sure also that the site would not be negatively impacted by any future surrounding development. And so that's the site that we're currently looking at. But again, it's 180 days due diligence process. And at the end of all of this, if between doing different site assessments, such as a phase 2 environmental, looking at whether or not we can get a goal exception, looking at the community feedback, looking at all of these factors, if it ends up that the board decides that this isn't the site that we need to relocate to, then after 180 days, we're done and there's no cost to the county. We do have 2 options to extend that purchase sale agreement, 2 90-day options, and each of those, I believe, is a cost of $10,000. So if we needed up to an additional 180 days to do more diligence, then it would have a cost to the county. But the first 6 months, we're just looking to see if whether or not this is an option. So the other things that we're looking at kind of go back to that 2012 plan in regards to alternate routes, alternate evacuation routes, truck routes, bypass routes. It was called a multitude of things, but just looking at alternatives. And so one of the alternatives that we're looking at for phase 2 is the acquisition of what's called the main line. And this road runs parallel with Highway 101 and Lewis and Clark Road. And the reason for this as an alternate is, one, we're looking for redundant routes. In a Cascadia type of event, it is highly likely that 101 and Lewis and Clark Road will be wiped out, whether or not because of the tsunami or because of the geological makeup of the dirt that Lewis and Clark Road is built on. So we're looking at something that is higher up and on more stable ground. So this particular letter of intent that we signed was signed back in May of 2020 with Greenwood Resources. And this is a much longer due diligence period. It has a 20-month due diligence period. Again, at the end of this process, if it's found that this is not the best option for the county to pursue, there's no cost to the county. So there are other future phases that are also under consideration, and that includes the north portion of the main line that would connect closer to where the sort yard is located, and then also the Twilight or pipeline. And both of these phases are the 2 purple routes. And these, at this point in time, the county's not doing any work on those. We don't have any purchase sale agreements in place, no letters of intent. We're just focusing on the other 2 phases at this point in time. And so if you want to go ahead and go to the next phase or next slide, Gail, thank you.
Hold on.
I'm not the only one who has technical difficulty. Okay, so this slide here is a timeline. And so kind of as we just discussed, right now we're in phase 1, which is whether or not we're going to purchase. We have the purchase sale agreement in place, the due diligence, begin the goal exception process for the acquisition of the sort yard to relocate the public works facility. If it is decided that this is the best location, then we would be moving on to the facility and the design, completing the goal exception process and starting the permitting process. So once that's all completed, we would not be looking at a construction start date until, or site improvement date until 2022. And then in 2023, we would begin construction of the shop. And then once the shops are complete, we would begin construction of the offices in 2025. So as you can see, we are currently in 2020, although hard to believe it's almost over. This is not a rapid process, it is an ongoing process. And so then once we complete that piece of it, then if it was decided that we were to pursue phase 2, then we would begin the process with phase 2. Throughout all of this, again, we're trying to do the community outreach. So we did hold a meeting on August 13th. We had several community members who were on that meeting and had a lot of great questions and provided feedback. We have been trying to keep track of all of those questions that come in, and they're posted on our website. In addition, we sent out, many of you should have received, we sent out a questionnaire regarding this project, and we sent it out to all county residents, and we're trying to get a countywide feedback on where they feel the county should be focusing their efforts on resiliency, or if they feel that the county doesn't need to be focusing on those. We want to hear what the community members have to say. We've received a significant number of those back. We are compiling all of that data, and then once we have received it all, we're asking that all citizens return these by the end of September. Once we have received this information, then we will be taking that information before the board on October 6th for a work session to find out what next steps that they would like us to do. Again, this is all part of just finding out how the community feels about this project and what our next steps should be moving forward. And it's all part of the due diligence process. So the next slide, Gail. So we have been, like I said, we've been trying to get the information out there as much as possible. We've done, if you haven't liked us on Facebook, please like Clatsop County. We've been trying to do a lot of information through social media. We've done some, it's been some in the newspaper on our website, which the link is up here. We have a page that kind of is dedicated to this. So as we get more information, we update it. You'll find the map on there. You'll find the questionnaire. The questionnaire can be completed either by mailing it in a return already prepaid envelope, or you can complete it online using that unique identifier code that is on the letter that was sent to you. Or if you're not comfortable with either of those, you can also call in and Hannah can do the survey for you over the phone, again, getting your unique identifier code. Reason being is we're just trying to make sure that we're not duplicating answers as little as possible. So you'll also find the FAQs. Like I said, we've been tracking those. Those are listed on there, and the map that you had. So next steps, like I said, we're just going to be waiting for all of those surveys to get returned. We'll be going before the board on October 6th, find out from them what direction they want us to go next. And then once they give us that direction, then we'll be continuing to reach out to the community with more meetings. Ideally, we would like to set up some in-person meetings because that's just a little bit easier, and just making sure that we're doing so in accordance with the governor's guidance. So I'm happy to take any questions. I know that we also have staff from the Public Works office on the call as well.
Thank you, Monica. I see a finger up from Robert. We'll start there.
Hi, Monica. Who drafted the questions?
The questions on the questionnaire, that was an effort between, so our resiliency team consists of myself, Gail, Ted McLean from the Public Works Department, Terry Hendricks from Public Works, Dean Kiernan from Public Works, and Hannah Mathers is a Clatsop Works intern who is helping us with this project.
Jan?
Good presentation, and you obviously are being very cautious because you're getting a lot of pushback. I used to be a planner in California where we had to do seismic safety planning. I mean, that was just part of things. And the only thing I would comment is, don't say if we have a Cascadia event, it's when we have a Cascadia event. Because people, we all want to be in denial of that, because heaven knows there's enough problems now. But I worked just as I got paid $12 an hour by the City of Astoria's Public Works Director, and we worked on trying to get a bypass for 2 years, I think, and had a committee together. And at the last minute, ODOT dropped the EIR before it was completed, within a couple $100,000 of completing it. But it's clear we need a way to get out of here. We need a way for our public services to try to deal with all the complexities. And we've just got to start saying, this is going to happen, folks. It's overdue in terms of history, and we need to, it may make us uncomfortable, but that's the county's job, is to do that kind of planning and to provide service. That's what government is for.
Thank you.
Pat?
Yeah. Is that mine?
Sure, go ahead, Todd. We can come back to Pat.
Oh, thank you. Just two questions. One is, did you mail that to every resident or every residents in the county? And if
We-
so, what percentage have you gotten back?
We did mail it out to every resident. You know, it's not a perfect system, and so we have realized that there are a few hiccups, and so we've been trying to get the word out that if you haven't received your questionnaire, to please contact us, so that way we can get that squared away. In regards to the percentage that we have received back, I apologize because Hannah is out today, and so I don't know what our most recent numbers are, but we have received close to, I think, over 1,000 of responses. We've received a lot back as far as returned address, not deliverable, but we have received over 1,000 responses, or close to 1,000 responses that are useful for us.
Pat?
I think I like all kinds of resiliency, and this is obviously something where we have to do lots of things in all directions at the same time. And often in all communities, we tend to start with response and recovery, you know, and getting out of here and things like that. And of course, the flip side of that is, I think, something in Clatsop County, what this is relevant for this committee is to look at is the prevention part. I heard at a conference that like 30% of the developable land in the tsunami inundation zone on the Oregon coast is in Clatsop County. You know, so we're kind of poised to put valuable things in vulnerable places just out of development pressure. And you know, obviously, the less we do that, the less we need to get away from things. You know what I mean? So we are fortunate in that we still have some time to avoid certain development in the worst places. And we can, I think, look at that when we get to goal 7 and things later on in this process. But I have not taken the survey, but I will. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. So we've at this point got several members of the public here as well. Any members of the public have a question for Monica about this process? I'm not seeing any microphones going live. Monica, I have a question just about funding for these projects. It appears in the FAQ that these are already funded from capital improvement funds set aside or something to that effect. No bonding or anything would be done for this.
No, so at this point in time, in regards to the acquisition of the properties, there's monies that have been set aside for this. In addition, for the construction of the public works facility, there's also money set aside for that. And then once we are to a certain point, then we would be listing our current public works facility for sale. And those would also be used to help fund the construction of the site. At this point in time, if things move forward with the portion of the South Main Line, if that was something that was considered to move forward, it would just be the acquisition of the property that we would be looking at this point in time, because again, the county doesn't want to go out to bond for these types of things, and we're looking more for just a route to be able to access the south part of the county, so that way we can get services down to those people down in Seaside and Arch Cape and Falcon Cove and that area down there.
Okay. I was also curious about, could you talk us through it? It appears to me, well, I've got a question about the due diligence period for the sort yard acquisition. By my count, the due diligence period would be in the beginning of next year, but the calendar starting July 2020 with a 6-month lead.
We signed July 30th of 2020, and so from that date we have 6 months to complete the initial 180 days of due diligence. And then if we're not able to get it all completed within that time, and the board still wants us to consider this site, then we have the option to purchase 2 additional 90-day periods for up to another 180 days. Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
So then it could continue to go into the 2021 calendar year. The due diligence for the main line, because that is a 20-month due diligence period, that one goes into 2021.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm just counting wrong in my head. I'm thinking that from the 7th into the 7th month would take us into January, but maybe I'm doing that incorrectly.
No, I mean, yeah, we're off by a month in regards to the sort yard due diligence.
Okay.
That's what you're looking at there, yeah.
No worries then. And then can you walk us through what the due diligence process is and who's performing that? Who?
Sure. So there's a variety of groups that are doing it. One of them is we have to apply for a goal exception. And so we are working on that. And that is something that we have met with, and Gail can correct me on all of the different entities that we have to work with on that. But we did meet with the Division of State Lands, was it, Gail?
It was Department of Land Conservation and Development, their farm forest expert, Hillary Foote.
Thank you. And so we did meet with them to talk about the steps we would need to take for the goal exception process, and our planning department, we would be able to work with them to be able to do that goal exception or apply for the goal exception. So that's one piece of it, and that's a pretty lengthy piece. That's at least 6 months in and of itself. Then when we were looking at different sites, we did have a phase 1 environmental study done, and that came back as having no contamination, but now we would need to do a phase 2 environmental study. So that is something that we will be working on as well. We are waiting to see what kind of feedback we get from the community surveys to see, because before we continue to pay for things, we want to make sure that we continue to move in the right direction. So we have that ready to go if we get a positive response in regards to the community survey and what direction the board wants us to go. And then we are also going to work with the National Parks Fort Stevens in regards to a traffic impact study. And then we're also going to just be looking from a geological standpoint in regards to the landslide capabilities of the property out there.
Thank you, Monica. Jim?
I have it unmuted now. I have a question on the basic process to identify potential sites. I'm assuming you started off with some type of, say, GIS, a series of GIS layers like inundation zones, identify main roads. Obviously, 101 would, you would want to stay away from that to be able to have a better transportation to different parts of the county. And what other types of certain maybe distance from these roads? What I'm getting at is like when you came out in the price, it came out like, okay, there is this one area that fits the bill now, tentatively. And my question really revolves around, was there a suite of sites, a section of sites, and this one happened to be one that the landowner was potentially amenable, or, how did you arrive at that particular site?
So we did look at a few different sites, and one of them being the North Coast Business Park, which has, a lot of people have mentioned, well, why aren't you using that? The county already owns it. And so that one, for a multitude of reasons, we eliminated that one from the list. The first and foremost being it's the intent of the county for all of the different districts, whether it's the school district, the city of Warrenton, the port, the county, to get that property on the tax roll. In addition, the amount of wetlands on that property and the amount of mitigation credits that we would need to be able to fill in the wetlands there, to have the amount of property that we would need for the public works facility would significantly be a greater cost than, for example, the property that we're looking at. We also looked at Crown Camp. We looked at Crown Camp as a possibility for just an alternate emergency staging area, as well as is it a good possibility for that to be a public works site. And so that kind of goes to some of the things that I mentioned previously about location and being available to the public. A lot of people think of our roads department as being out constructing roads, but we also have offices, whether it's the survey office, the engineer office, or just office staff, where people come in to get right-of-way permits or to get vacation information to vacate roads, to meet with the surveyor. So we're also looking for a site that's going to be easily accessible for both north, south, east, and west parts of the county. And then the size of the facility being the size of the property to be able to not only house our shops and our offices, but also to be able to store materials such as rock. In addition, if we do have when we have a seismic event, there is going to be significant debris, and we're going to have a location to move that debris to. This site in and of itself will not be enough to move all of that debris to, but that's just one more aspect that we're looking at when we're trying to figure out where we should move the facility to.
Okay, Monica, what I was really getting at, it sounds like you were looking at predetermined sites rather than looking at it holistically. And consequently, you'd be subject to criticism that you didn't have a broad brush look first, and then to narrow it down to, maybe it only narrows down to that one particular site that you're looking at right now. But at least you can have a sound argument that these are the factors, these are the areas that were initially identified, these are the reasons why some of those areas were not suitable. And you've named a number, you've named the key ones, but it still sounds to me like you already said, okay, it's only A, B, C, D, and E have potential, and let's just look at those instead of looking at it more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, we probably could have looked at more sites, but it did kind of narrow down to the fact of sites of the size that we're looking for, meeting the requirements that we're looking for, and where those sites are located at. So it came down to availability of land.
Okay.
Any other questions from the group or from the public for Monica? Monica, I'm not seeing any. I appreciate you coming in and giving us the presentation, updating us on where that work is going and how it's progressing, what we can look for. Thank you.
Thank you, and please just continue to check the website if you're interested in learning more as we progress. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a section here which is one of two, including one at the end in our agenda for public comment and input. There are several members of the public I see here. Do any of you have opening public comment for today's session, where we're mostly covering historic and cultural resources within Goal 5? Okay, I'm not seeing any mics coming unmuted or seeing any comments in the chat, so I'm going to take that as a no. So I think we can move to goal 5 discussion. I would maybe orient folks to, I believe it is page 39 in the agenda packet, 39 and 40, which is the worksheets for goal 5 with the red headers. But Gail, do you have any introductory material you want to start with for us today?
I do, thank you. Just briefly, I wanted to give a little overview of the historic and cultural resources portion of Goal 5, how we will be working through that, and to just sort of reiterate the 3 tasks that you have before you today. Okay, so Goal 5 has a requirement. It's not, there's no getting around it. You have a requirement to inventory your cultural resources, and we are encouraged but not required to inventory our historic resources. So there is actually a definition in OAR that is for historic resources, which are defined as those buildings, structures, objects, sites, and districts that potentially have significant relationship to events or conditions of the human past. There is no definition of cultural resource in either of the OARs. So there's 2 OARs that are governing our inventory process when we look at historic resources. It's section or 660 division 23 and I think that should be 660 also division 16. So nowhere in there have we defined cultural resources. I know that some of the committees have talked about creating a definition or the need to do that, but nobody has really tackled that yet to date. So when we talk about an inventory process, it's laid out in the Oregon Administrative Rules, OAR. So the first step is to assemble an inventory of all known Goal 5 historic and cultural resources. And you can see that one's checked off, and that list is included in your packet, and we'll be looking at that shortly. So the step that we're on today is to identify which of those resources that have been inventoried you would like to consider for further research. And then what would happen, and Cheryl mentioned the Northeast group, they identified 3 additional resources being Bradwood, Clifton, and the Swenson Cemetery. So as we identify resources and the committees identify resources, what would happen then is we as staff will go back, do the research that we can, find the research that we can on those resources. We would bring that back, and then you have another task ahead of you that is not tonight, but sometime in the future. Your task then would be to look at the research and determine whether or not we even have enough information available to make any kind of decisions about a site. If you determine that there is enough information available, then your next step is to review that information and determine whether or not that particular site or resource is significant. And then if you make a determination that it is significant, then it should be included in your Goal 5 resource inventory. So if we have a property that is recommended for inclusion in Goal 5, then by state statute, we have to allow them the property owner an option to opt out of it. So you cannot designate a site that does not have a willing owner behind it. And then, and only then, once you've got a site listed in Goal 5 and you got the property owner on board, then at that point, you can go ahead and create specific regulations to protect the resource or the site, is what that means. So within the county, when we did Goal 5 in 1980, they put in, I believe it's 10, I always forget to count them, 10 or 11 different resources that they identified. And those are listed here, and they're listed in the inventory that's in your packet. So one of the things we'll be looking at tonight is whether or not we're still happy with all these. Should some of them be removed? And then we will also be looking at which ones do you want to identify for staff to pick out for future research? So that's task number one. The second thing that we're asking the committee to do tonight is to review the existing policies that we have. And Todd and Cheryl both talked about how their committees have made recommendations on those. And then also, if time permits, to think about any issues that were not covered in 1980 that have arisen since that time, and to begin drafting some new policies that would help to address those issues. And now I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
So I may have a couple here, Gail, and then maybe I might ask you to go through the procedure that you want us to follow today as well. Again, the first question is, so you're indicating that there's not a set definition for cultural resources. Did I understand that correctly? Do you know? Do you know where the existing comp plan on page 32 of our packet, or 60 of the comp plan, has a definition quoted? Do you know where they got that definition from?
I do not. No.
Okay, so I mean, it seems sort of unbelievable to me that we have a requirement without a definition. Am I interpreting that correctly? That they defined the thing that is not required and then required a thing that is not defined?
It would appear that way. I do not know where that definition came from. I went through the 2 OARs that govern this process, and there were no definitions for cultural resources included. But there is one for historic resources that is spelled out.
Do you have a staff opinion on whether or not we should continue to follow the definition that's listed there in the existing plan?
I think that there's value to it. I mean, when I look at it, when I think of cultural resource, if I hear that term, my first thought is usually archaeological site, is what usually comes to mind. But I think that we have an opportunity now to look at what was included in 1980 and then to decide whether or not that still is accurate or accurately reflects how we see cultural sites 40 years later.
Okay. So Jim, I'll get to you in just a second. I think my sense of this is if we don't have a definition from some other source, that it's more useful for us to have some definition than not to have one to work with. So I'd prefer to keep that quoted area as our working definition going forward into this plan. Is there feedback from the group about that notion?
I'd concur. That seems to make sense until we need to change it, if we need to change it.
Okay.
Yeah, my comment has to do with, we should actually look at to see if the states defined it or the feds defined it, instead of trying to come up with something, reinventing the rock. We can actually look at what other people have used and use that as a starting point to see if that fits our needs here.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea, Jim. If we can find another state definition from OAR or otherwise, I think that it would be reasonable to go that direction. I would say that on a personal level, I don't necessarily agree. As a former archaeologist, I don't necessarily agree with the sentence following that it's only that only pertains to Native American villages and activity centers. But I'm happy to discuss that when we get to other sections. Gail, do you think it's possible for staff to look for a definition from other state materials and maybe get back to us about whether or not we want to update this or not?
Yeah, I did start to do some digging around, but I didn't find anything. But I'll keep looking. Okay,
thank you. My other question actually has to do with archaeological sites, which is, so the roster of archaeological sites is hidden to the public. But you mentioned in your slides that owners of properties that have historical resources on them are given some leeway on whether or not they agree to have that resource protected. Is that the same situation for archaeological resources?
I don't know. I would suspect so. Everything that's in OAR dealt specifically with historical resources. So I will check on that, but I would imagine the same process would apply.
Okay. Thank you. Were there other questions from the group? I know, Jim, you did have your hand up earlier, but I don't know if it was just to the definition point. Okay.
Yes, it was only for the definition point. At this point in time, I'll have other questions, but not at the moment.
Sure. Thank you. Chris, I saw you just became unmuted.
Yeah, just a quick point. I notice in the text that's on the screen there, it mentions the State Historic Preservation Office. I would think that the State Historic Preservation Office might be worth consulting for definition of cultural areas.
Thanks,
and does the state have a state archaeologist? Many states have, some kind of a small office of people that deal with archaeological sites and information. So I would approach the state for that definition.
Pat?
I think I sent a link out to everybody from the National Preservation Institute, what are cultural resources? And it says the term is not defined in the NEPA or any other federal law. However, there are several laws and executive orders that deal with particular kinds of resources that are cultural in character. And it goes and it kind of categorizes, including Native American graves, Historic Preservation Act, archaeological resources, and things like that. So at least there's some federal words that could help guide that.
Hello.
Thank you, Patrick. Robert?
Just relying on the Google, just to see where this went, the origin of life here. I just did the first few words, an area characterized by evidence of an ethnic, religious or social group, just those words. And it's been repeated, at least 518 times, so somewhere here, there is something about the origin of species. Someone said this, it's oft repeated in organ planning. So maybe using your archaeological skills, we can find out whence this originated. It's not a random set of words. It's a 518 times has been cited.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, I think that at least gives us some places to dig, right?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions from the group? And then I might, Jan?
I was just thinking in the back of my head about other cultural groups, and I like the idea of there being recognition of Scandinavian influence in the area, of the contribution of the Chinese, etc. I think those are more likely to happen and are happening in the cities themselves. I know in Astoria, there's both going to be a Scandinavian park, and the Garden of Surging Waves, it has recognition of the Chinese. So maybe it's not as necessary in the counties, though I'd like to see some narrative about it at least.
Thanks, Jan.
striking for me was the lack of Native American cultural resources in any of the lists. And I'm glad to see, Jan, the material that you forwarded and shared with us. And that would seem to really add to the comprehensiveness of it. And those places would equally likely be in the county areas as they would be concentrated in the cities, unlike sort of the other ones.
So thank you for the questions and feedback there. Gail, I might ask, so just for clarity's sake, it sounded like you wanted us to go through the listing of the historic and cultural resources, which I think is on page 36 in the PDF that has that green border, right? You wanted us to go through that as an itemized list and then continue to the goal policies. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Did you have a method in mind of how we would go through this?
There is no method. I'm happy to go through. We can go through one by one. When Northeast looked at it, they pretty much knew in their heads already what they were interested in and what they weren't. So I think it's really whatever is going to work best for the committee.
Okay, and just to
sorry, as a note, so the items that are already included in the county's comprehensive plan, which is this last section, they are highlighted here on the other inventories that came from the various state agencies. I think Cheryl pointed out there was one here that I missed. This is actually the Shepherd and Morse Mill, the Westport Lumber Company sawmill site, which I didn't realize was the same resource, so that one didn't get highlighted. So you can see there's a lot of overlap on the list. Several of these items show up several different times, but there's really not that many of them. A lot of them you'll see are, especially when we get to the state inventory, some of them are just listed as house. There's not really any information to even identify which house it might be. Where staff was able to, we did put notes in. So for example, this one, a house on Tomberg Road, was listed in the state inventory as being constructed circa 1910. But when we pull it up on the appraiser's website or the assessor's website, they list it as 1946. And if you were to actually pull up the picture that's on the website, it's been remodeled and altered quite a bit, so it probably doesn't retain any historic significance at this point. So we've tried to note where we could items that might help you in deciding whether or not to pursue a particular resource further.
Thanks, Gail. Robert?
I'm fascinated about the concept of cultural in Clatsop County, and kind of in conjunction with, say, Charleston and wherever else. You know, the question I would never ask is the Scandinavian Festival a racist event? It just is not a very polite question. Oh no, it's about heritage, not racial identity. I think this is, I'm not trying to avoid the topic because I think much of our county's identity has this what's not the word, but breaking the frontier, you know, winning over the forest, you know, burning down the giant Sitka spruce because this is our manifest destiny. And I just somehow think it really is part of our county's population cultural identity to still be captured in the Jacksonian persuasion, kind of the 1890s mentality. And I think it's great for us not to gloss over the cultural bits. Yes, there were a hell of a lot more Chinese in the county in 1890 than there were Scandinavians, etc. So I'm thinking this is a real opportunity to broaden the concept of what is of cultural importance, to include reflections of attitudes, even when that's simply a selection process that we go through. This goes back to my first speech class at Cal, was that when you have a festival like the Scandinavian Festival, hey, it is what it is. It's the fact that we can have a little park down along the Astoria waterfront that emphatically rests upon that racial identity, and is, I think, a very brave thing for us to go through. The Irishmen among us, the Swedes among us, the Welsh sitting here at the table. So I will shut up, but I look forward to this broad reflection about cultural identity that is underway. I know that Duncan Law, for example, his family lived out at Smith Lake. Did he feel that the Chinese were integrated into society in Clatsop County? Hell no. These are all good topics. What's his name at Shalona Winery? He remembers well he's still alive, but he remembers well the prejudice against Catholics in Clatsop County.
Paul.
There's just lots of culture in our county's history that where we can still get live human beings wagging their lips, telling their own experiences, and I think this is an opportunity. Period. Bye-bye.
Jan?
I know this takes us off going through the list, and I'm not sure when's the good time to take it on, but I'm wondering, Gail, is it possible to, or would staff be willing to include narrative about the county's history? I mean, I know, for instance, one reason that we don't have many Chinese here is Astoria was a sunset town. People had to be out of the area at one time if they weren't the right color. I don't know whether we need to put that in or not, but I think it certainly would make more interesting reading if we could talk about both the Chinookan peoples and the Clatsop Nehalem and what was here and how the waves of immigrants came in and how the area has gone on.
It was a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan too, Jan.
Oh, there surely was, but I don't know whether you as staff, whether that's appropriate in Oregon to have that kind of narrative. You don't need to have policies for each of those things. I mean, the policies can relate more to well, certainly with cultural resources, then you can have some policies, but it just tells you more about, if you're gonna have a section on history, that's our history.
Oregon Humanities has certainly tried to educate Clatsopians about their history, and very rarely does anyone from Clatsop County show up to any of those library events.
Pat?
And so I'm trying to filter that through the task at hand, through the county comp plan update, kind of what bits. I like that, like a preamble, but certainly not, recounting that it's not the time for the county history. I guess more mundane as I was looking at the list was I did see scale differences. Like there would be somebody's cabin, a salt works, and then it would be like Saddle Mountain was like cultural or natural, or Young's Bay. So maybe there could be some winnowing of sort of vast, there may be something about that we could articulate, but I think it could be thinned a little bit by the scale, broad scale things like saying that Young's Bay is a cultural resource, unless we can specify a little bit more.
Thanks, Pat. Jim?
Well, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time, but it sounds like we're getting off of the track a little bit anyway. But I am impressed with the number of items that's been listed by several sources that was included in the package. The Clatsop Historical Society, John Gutenberger, a couple of other individuals, but there's a lot of duplicity involved in it. There's also not enough information on any one to really make a fair assessment, whether it should be federal, state, or county. And the county is what I'm more interested in at the moment. I would like to see the county be a certified local government for designating county relevant or historical areas. And by doing so, we'd be able to easily make we'd be able to make a distinction between county importance versus state importance and even federally importance areas. And that gets back to, I don't know if the advisory group is still in force, but it seems like it is way big of a task, larger of a task than we could possibly do, is to go through these and say yes, yes, no, no, yes, no. If it's not active, my suggestion would be sort of a private-public type of an arrangement for a group, including the Historical Society, Lower Columbia Preservation Society, whom I have contacted, and they are interested in participating in some form. It's very loose at this particular point in time, plus some citizenry that's outside of those organizations. And if we can become a certified local government, then we'd be able to look at the whole list more holistically, maybe drop some, add some, and then be able to delve deeper into the history, because there's some real specific in the OARs, real specific criteria of what you really need to do to document it, and it's not trivial. So I'd like to push for a more longer term approach, a longer horizon, to be able to set something in force that'd be able to do a better job than we could now.
Gail, you seem to have a response to the documentation issue anyway, or evaluation.
So I apologize because I obviously didn't do a good job explaining what we were doing tonight. So what we're doing tonight is not looking at the inventories that have been assembled by other agencies and telling them that they've done it correctly or incorrectly. What we are doing tonight is taking this list and looking at what other agencies, this is our existing inventory. This is our inventory of known sites that we know of through other documentation that have been deemed historic, whether it's by Parks and Recreation Department, the State Historic Preservation Office, whether it's the group that handles the historic cemeteries. All that this committee needs to do tonight is to look at this list and say, oh, Astoria Marine Construction Company, they might be worth putting in our goal 5, but we don't know enough about it. We want staff to go back and find some more information. All I want is a list from the committee members tonight of things that you think we need to look at a future date that might be worthy of including in Goal 5. So Jim, you have a very large, broad scope of what you would like to undertake, but that's really not what we need to undertake. And we're not here to edit anybody's list. We're here except our own. Does that make sense? And help clarify the process that we need to do tonight. I'm not asking you to designate anything. I just want the group to tell me, we want you to find more information about these 3 properties or 10 or however many you think you want to pick out. Does that make sense?
So we're just teeing it up for further staff action.
Right. So, and I obviously didn't do a good job. So we're at this step tonight. We've put together the list. Staff has put together the list of all the known inventories. So we went to the state agencies, we went to the National Register, we pulled all of their listed properties. We are on this yellow step here, which is identify resources for further research. We're not doing the research tonight. We haven't done the research tonight. We're not asking you to designate or deem anything significant, but we're here. So you give us a list of, whoops, crazy. You give us a list of what you want us to look at, and then when we bring it back, then that's when the groups would determine whether we even have enough information to even move forward from that point on. If we do have enough information, is that site really as significant as we thought it might be? And if it is, then you have to make a decision whether or not to include it as a Goal 5 resource.
Gail, can I ask a couple of questions about this? Is it 2 burdens? How much of a burden do you think is going to be represented per site here? So the scope between we can ask you to do a half dozen of these, or we could ask you to do all of them. If we ask you to do all of them, are you never going to get it done? You know, like what's the possible scope we can ask for here?
The possible scope is you could ask for everything that's on here. As I said, there is some duplication. We're not proposing to bring this back next month. Just to be very clear about this, this will be something that we will circle back to during the process. It may be that some of these, you know, for example, where it just says house in Napa, somewhere between Coppish and Old Highway 30. I'm going to come back right now and I can tell you, we don't have any information on it because we don't know which house it is. So
I know that house.
Why, it's the house where Patrick grew up. So obviously, historically significant. But there is a lot of crossover. So, I mean, we would bring back what we can at a future date. So it's really what you look at and immediately say, you know, we really should consider this. We want to know more.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, I see you're unmuted, and Patrick, I'm going to go Patrick, Cheryl, Robert. It looks like all 3 of you have comments. Patrick.
Okay, great. So I think, you know, Western culture is fairly well documented, as you mentioned, Native culture can be brought in, not just archaeological, but there may be some cultural things, and I can't speak to that, but that would be a category for some research. And I'm thinking recent culture. You know, there was the 70s brochure that talked about the cultural list of things. And I'm thinking, what's recent culture? Has something happened since then that we're going to look back and think was culturally significant? The only thing that pops to mind is I think the fairground has moved since that time. And I don't know if that, you know, county property will have any cultural significance if it's on the list, or if it should, or other parts of it. But I'm thinking about, has anything happened culturally in the county recently that might be worth designation? That's all.
Thank you, Patrick. Cheryl?
I just wanted to help us try and refocus. Our purpose is to focus on comprehensive land use. And there are a lot of very intelligent, articulate people on our committee, and so we sometimes go a long ways out. we're at an hour and a half into this and we have not yet started going through the sheet that Gail would like for us to go through today. So I'm wondering if we can refocus on that. And I'll take partial credit for taking us out into the ozone. I'm the one who brought up Chinese culture. Our goal in land use planning is not to write history or culture of Clatsop County. Our focus is, as y'all recall, to make sure that farming land stays farming, that it doesn't get absorbed by all of the other things. We need to refocus on the lands and the purpose of the lands and not get too far out there. The National Registry and both the Oregon State Registry, the folks in Northeast Clatsop County went through these. We have recommended 3 that we would like to see added and feel quite comfortable that any of the others listed in our area, for instance, there are 3 in Napa that are listed as house, house, and house. We did not see any need for staff or anyone to spend time or energy to go forward with those. So I also just need to say that we started out on goal 5 and then we broke it into smaller pieces and we've now added 6 months to the work that we're doing. If every month when we meet, we add another month because we're going a lot of different directions in a lot of spaces, we will never get this finished, number one, time-wise. And number 2, one of the young people in the Northeast group has gone and looked at the comprehensive land use plans from other counties, and they're small and clean. This one from Clatsop County is so old and very large and very cumbersome. We really need to look at streamlining it and making it clean and useful and workful, not becoming more of a cumbersome burden than it already is. The end from me.
Gail, is that a response hand before we go to Robert?
Yeah, and I want to thank Cheryl for that, and to follow up with that. So the reason, maybe if as we refocus, the reason we want to identify sites that have historic significance is because we use that list then to be able to draft protections in our codes, things like setbacks from historic structures or other items. If we were to become a certified local government and go down that path, then we may want to look at creating other regulations in terms of perhaps, and I'm not saying this, that we're going to do it, but if you wanted design review for certain historic resources. So there is a very specific reason why we're looking at this, not just because it's nice to have a talk about the history of the county, but because we want to identify those places that are so significant that they require or warrant extra protections in our code.
Thanks, Gail. Robert?
I'm here. We are so thick with history here in the county, and as far as places forgotten, but what's her name? Bithynia Owens Adair. There's readily available in your own words from 1905. Over 100 pages of reminiscing of specific locations in the county that we don't think of right now. I was simply looking up about the man at Woluska. And there's just vast detail about the diking of all the tidelands. It's how much we want to ignore, but it certainly is easy to get a fresh look of what do they call the first-hand documents, or secondhand. I mean, people who are telling their stories from the 1800s about all these places. Yes, you can get a lot from the Lewis and Clark journals of places that we may not consider historic. There are documents in the flat drawers of the county cartographer showing a different slant of has to do with land use planning, but ways that we don't think of things right now. And as to whether or not we care, I will quickly say that I don't think that a slick, trimmed down comprehensive plan best serves the future generations of Cletsopians. And I'm happy if this process outlives everybody whose pictures are showing up on the screens today. It'll give Gail a permanent job. Anyway, I think we have a lot of historic information that isn't third hand. It's not someone talking about. It's original data from the 1800s. And whether Gail's the one who sifts through it for what's currently relevant about land use planning, or it's someone else, I wouldn't think of dumping it on Gail's lap. But I think we're being dumb, moronic, not to look at the vast historical record that's available in firsthand accounts over the past 200 years, period.
Thank you, Robert. So I do want to say, well, a couple of things. One is, this is direction by staff for us to go through this list, which we haven't really even started yet, but I do want to get through it. And I think it is necessary, and we allow ourselves to be misguided if we look at documents like, say, early on in the process, we were given the Lane County comp plan as a good example of a trimmed down comp plan. It's 89 pages long. It's worth noting it has a 60-page appendix of historical sites. So they did go through this exhaustive process and list out these sites, including ones that still need to be examined. They just didn't keep it in the mainline document like we chose to last time. So I think, whether we do that all in this sitting or not, other places are recognizing this as a valuable resource too, to keep in the comp plan process. So I don't want us to just completely gloss over these things. Yeah, Jim.
Andy, I think you're getting at something that I was thinking of. It seems to me it's unwise to hard code specific sites within the comprehensive plan, but we should be focusing on general policies and then referring to another document that can be updated as time goes on, so that we don't have to wait another how many years until a comprehensive plan is updated. So that way there, it'd be easier to be more of a living document.
Gail, did you have a reply to that?
Yes, so again, to go back to the Oregon administrative role, there is a very specific process you go through if you want to create protections in your code for historic and archaeological sites. If they are not in your comprehensive plan, you cannot be putting regulations in place to add extra protections for them. You can amend the comprehensive plan at any time. It doesn't have to be a 40-year, once in a generation update. You could go every month and update the comp plan. You could go every week and update the comp plan. So there is not a time limit or that prohibits you from adding things or changing things in your comp plan. It's just that the county has never been very good at keeping it up to date. So.
Thank you, Gail. So for the sake of today, does anyone in the group want to make specific recommendations? Cheryl, you listed some that Gail should have had coming out of the Northeast group about maybe striking some of the houses, as you said, in the Napa area. Are there other specific recommendations that we want to propagate out of this group about line items from this list that we want to exclude, or things that we want to make sure? Yep, Gail?
Okay, I'm sorry, because I'm obviously doing a very poor job of explaining how this process works. So I apologize for that, because I'm just at a loss. These lists are already established at state level. They're established at the federal level. It's as if I gave you a list of 17 colors and said, pick your favorite one. That's what I'm asking you to do. I'm not asking you to change my list of 17 colors. All I want you to do is look at this and say, okay, Ecola Point site is not included in our comprehensive plan. That means it doesn't get any extra protection. Is it something that might deserve extra protection? So then you say, yes, we want to know more about this site so we can decide if we have enough information to determine if it's significant and worthy of extra protection. And if it is, then we'll put it in the comp plan. All I want tonight are your favorite colors. That's all I want. Does that make sense? I don't know how to explain it any more clearly, so.
Let's keep doing that.
I apologize.
So the reason I had stated it that way, Gail, was only because Cheryl had given the feedback that when her group went through the list, that they really only found a handful of items to exclude. It sounded like they mostly said, yeah, these items seem good to us to analyze for further protection. Is that not accurate for what Northeast came back with?
No, that is not accurate. It's the flip side, exact opposite.
Okay. So their group said only the highlighted things that we've already got in the inventory. No?
No. So what their group said is they went through this list. Obviously, the ones that are highlighted are already in the comp plan. They're there. Okay. So then they went through and they said, oh, well, here somewhere we have a list of historic cemeteries. Okay. So Cheryl pointed out that the Swenson Cemetery, she thought was one that would be worthy of extra research and review. So the group agreed that, yes, please bring that back to us in the future, do the research, bring it back, and then we'll look at it again. And then they talked about Bradwood and Clifton, which are not included on these lists, but may be worthy of additional research. So Cheryl, do you have anything to add?
No, that was a nice summary, Gail. Yeah, Annie, I'm sorry if I misled you. We did not go through and itemize things that should not be on the list. It was just obvious to us that some of them were not worthy of our attention. So in the end, we recommended 3 specific things that we would like for Clatsop County to look at and see, as best I understand the process. Number 1, is there enough information to include it? And then step number 2 is it important enough? So there were 3 specific ones that we asked the county to please put some time into and check out.
Okay. So thank you, Cheryl. So Gail, is the process that you would like to see that we name specific things that we would like to be included?
Yes.
Okay. So from this group, looking through, I guess we could start on the National Register of Historic Places. Are there items on that list that the group would especially like to have included?
Oh, this is going to take forever.
Todd, did you have an item or just
Actually, our group came up with 4 items to be added. When would I put those in?
items to be added that are not on the National
Yes.
Register? Okay.
Right.
I feel like if you want to add items at any point, it's safe enough to do so.
May I do it now?
Yeah, did Gail also have those items from your meeting?
I don't know. Gail, do you have the Arch Cape Tunnel, the wagon trail blasted in Hug Point and the geological sites around Hug Point? Do you have those?
Ian has those, yes.
Ian has those. There are 4 of them. Okay, that would be it.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
And I think that Commissioner Webb had her.
Yeah, Commissioner Webb, did you have your hand up as well?
I did. I guess I'm assuming from the training, which was since we were all together in the Boynton building, it was before the pandemic. So if you're like me, you probably have no memory of it. But I think when Gail was explaining to us at that meeting about kind of the hierarchy of historic preservation designations in this country, I am accustomed to having local comp plans acknowledge the National Register sites, the state register sites, because we don't really have any control over those designations. But usually in respect of that what's often a very complicated process, most local governments will simply acknowledge the existence of those listings, incorporate them in their plan so that they can help in the preservation of them. And often it's at the local level that those resources are sacrificed, because the National Register doesn't ask the property owners for all of the probably hundreds of thousands of sites that it has granted a listing to. So it really is up to us. And so there really shouldn't be, I believe, any conversations other than to say, we will incorporate these listings into our comp plan, and we will add the following places. And I think that one of the things that when Gail was proposing the local government certification, I thought that was an effort then that we could in the future be very careful about what we're offering, what we're adding to these existing lists. And so I guess I'm confused about going through this list. These lists are a fait accompli. I mean, they are in existence. These exist. And all we have to do in Oregon legally is to incorporate them into our comp plan, and it can be by reference to Appendix 25. But that the issue should be to what places do we want to add that are not in these otherwise protected places. And that's an exercise that I certainly wouldn't want us to do just in the comp plan process right now. I would suggest that if we say in the comp plan that we're going to try to gain certification as a local government, that perhaps that's a task that we would do then after that happened. Just a suggestion to simplify the process. Remember also that in Oregon, the comp plan rules. What the comp plan says is what holds up in court. So if you reference all of these other designated places, you're referencing, you're protecting those places. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jan, did you have a statement as well? I don't hear you.
I was just cheering, that's all. It seems to me a reasonable fix, and you know, because I look through and it's you to try to balance this out as a group. There's just no reason to eliminate some of these places, other than maybe we don't know where they are and it's a house someplace on a street. But I would say let's go with that approach and add stuff if we know of stuff that needs to be added.
Jim.
I agree. I think it's a good path forward, make life a little easier for Gail and her staff, as well as being able to set the stage to ask for to be a certified local government, so that other areas may be at least evaluated, like we've had in several different lists that were part of our package that are potential, they're duplicative. I mean, there are a lot of that, but at least be able to, at a more logical pace, be able to review those and see if we want to make them significant at the county level.
Thank you, Jim. Gail, do you have a reaction to that?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm hearing sentiment from a group. Does anyone, to save us time here, does anyone want to make a quick motion on how we deal with these? Let's see, there's 4 historic listings here. Jan.
I'll give it a try. I move that we incorporate the attachment giving the resources and list of historic and archaeological sites into the document by reference. And I guess that's it.
I second.
Okay, so I'm going to just insert the names for clarification there, but Jan moves and Jim seconds that we incorporate by reference the NHRP, SHPO, well, I guess SHPO historic preservation, historic sites listing, and the SHPO archaeological sites listing, and the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department historic cemeteries listing into the comp plan goal 5 by reference. Does that capture this?
Thank you. Yes.
Is there a discussion?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes, just that motion does not leave room for addition of sites. And I thought maybe we should not reference them individually, but at least include in the motion something about additional sites to be suggested by the county or by this committee or by some entity.
I don't necessarily see the motion as exclusionary, but could I take that as an amendment to the motion?
Yes. Yes, please.
So,
or could we just have what Jan just said was the first, say, policy, whatever. Then on the second would be additional additions or even deletions could be like a second motion, so that it creates a little more of a live document rather than keeping things that just says, you know, house and not defined or anything like that. So that would be able to add or subtract stuff into in the future.
I accept that.
Okay. So is there any objection to adding that these lists can be or the inventory created by these lists can be amended to allow the insertion or deletion of sites? Is that acceptable to the group? Gail?
Okay, we cannot amend the National Register historic
Right.
list. We can add places into our Goal 5 that are specific and unique to our county list, but we cannot amend the state and the national list.
So you can, I'm happy to have language suggested here, but when I said to amend the inventory to allow the insertion or deletion, I'm referring to our Goal 5 inventory, which is at this moment using these lists as a starting point.
Well, what I was thinking, what about this, Jan? What about this? If we could propose to the state, I don't even think about the feds, but at least at the state level, we could propose additions or deletions. And I would have to assume that they would take the county's wishes seriously. They may not agree, but at least be able to do that so that we have some input into adding or deleting from the state list.
So
I'd be okay.
Hold up. Let me pull back a little bit here. So we have a motion and an amendment on the floor. My preference and our rules would indicate that we need to work with what we've got from Todd before we even go back to talking about using the inventory. So can we discuss just this isolated thing? Should we be able to add or subtract things from our inventory? And if that's an impossibility, Gail, because of your understanding of how we'd be incorporating this inventory, then maybe we should strike this, but that's a decision of the group. Gail.
Okay, so you're not adopting something by reference, okay, and acknowledging that we have National Register historic sites, state inventory sites within the county is one thing. Or maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not, according to Robert. But in Goal 5, we have a specific list of resources that we in the county in 1979 looked around the county and said, okay, we know that these places might be National Register, they might be state inventory, SHPO may know all about them, but we as a county want to add extra protections. These are the sites that I need you to identify as our Goal 5 inventory resources. Those are the ones that will get the extra protection. And you can add to them and take them away as you want. As I said, we can amend the comprehensive plan as often as we want. It's up to the board to make those decisions whether or not to approve it. And I've lost my train of thought now, but yeah. So you can amend it at any time. I don't think we need an amendment to the motion to say we can amend the comp plan.
Jan, you've been unmuted for a bit, and then Pat.
Well, I would just say I was on the State Heritage Commission for 8 years, and my experience with both SHPO and with the cemeteries group is that they are open to working with us. And so I think it seems to me that we ought to keep the amendment, the First Amendment clean. And then if we want to add something about our more recent locally evaluated sites, then we do that. And I don't see any that's going to create any problems.
And I'm thinking along those same lines. I mean, it might be in this discussion of the motion and the amendment, I would be happier to have the original motion to adopt by reference and then be done. And then we can follow up with a quick motion afterwards about our ability to add sites or modify things that we can control. Like Jan said, to make it clear to adopt what's already there, and then have another motion to be able to add or subtract on the margins as we can.
Andy, may I withdraw my amendment?
I don't believe it had a second, so it dies for lack of a second if no one speaks up. Okay, so we're back to the original motion to adopt the historic lists by reference. Any discussion of that motion? Pat? No, okay. Well, let's do vote without objection then, since we don't have discussion coming up. Is there anyone who objects to the motion to adopt the historic lists by reference? Hearing no objection, the motion passes. And Todd, I think my understanding would be that that doesn't in any way prohibit us from establishing our own local ones as well. Whether or not we're advising these other groups to include them, I think we can designate our own. This is not prohibiting us from doing anything. Cheryl?
I'm interested in the suggestion that staff gave to us. Should the county become a certified local government? And we asked Gail what that meant, and she did a nice explanation for us. So I don't know if we need that now, but I'm wondering if becoming a certified local government is the pathway for us to be able to add things as we go forward. So I'm wondering if this is how we get to where we want to be or not.
So I think that's a good question, Cheryl. I do note that on the blue worksheet of suggested historical resource policies, there is the suggestion to become a certified local government. That's on page 42. So assuming we can get through the material, we may have some natural space to discuss that, if that's okay. Jim, just one second. Gail, is there any other material we need to cover on this section, the listings, before we move on to the worksheets?
No, there's not. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, actually, Gail, I had a question to you. I believe I understand what you originally were requesting is of the list to earmark certain ones that in the comprehensive plan to have more specific guidance above and beyond what, say, the state protection would provide. Now, my question to you, I mean, is that essentially correct? Is that really what you were looking for? Okay. Now, my question to you is like, is there any kind of a way that we can include additional protection or maybe considerations, maybe not protections, considerations that are more blanket so that we could maybe categorize the list into several groups and then have, consideration for this group, consideration for that group, and leave it at that rather than more detail for site by site or location by location basis.
Yes, so when you get to your new policies section, that would be where you'd want to break out your groups and identify specific policies that you'd like to apply to them.
Okay, thank you.
Gail, do you think it's appropriate for us to take up policy 1 at this time?
Yeah, I do have to end the meeting probably no later than about 4:50 to give the next group time to get set up and get their meeting running and get their materials up. So we've got about 40 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Fair warning. So policy 1, do we have feedback from the group on this encouraging the State Parks Division when they're developing their master plan for Ecola Park to give proper recognition to historical activities that occurred here? We do have a recommendation from the Clatsop Plains group. Do we have a notion from this group? Should we, is this goal met? Are we done here? Jim?
My question is, does the state need to do this anyway? Do they need to take into account historical activities that occurred within state property before conducting an activity? So that I'll stop there.
Gail, do you know an answer to that question?
No, I'm not familiar with the state requirements for their park plans.
Right. You know, obviously what I'm getting at is if they do, then it's not really necessary. They already, if that's their state regulations that they have to do surveys for historical activities or whatever, then that's being redundant. If they don't, on the other hand, then obviously this policy is critical.
So I guess my feedback on that point, Jim, would just be that if we want this to be happening, we can't necessarily control what policies the state retains or does not retain, even if they have that policy at this moment. So if we want this to continue, we might consider including it anyway. I would note that, as in the staff note, that this process has already taken place, the development of a master program, or that's how I read the staff note, that they've already got the master plan developed. So do we want to update the language to be, say, when updating their master plan, something to that extent, even if we retain this? Is that something, Gail, is that something that could be considered just a Scrivener's change to reflect the reality on the ground at this point?
I wouldn't say it's a Scrivener's change in that we just go in right now and update it. I think we would include that just as a general part of the package of recommended changes.
Okay. Is there any objection to changing developing to updating? Okay, seeing none there. Is there any objection to us including this policy 1 in, or keeping it in the plan? Jan?
I just have a question. Do we need to say, to leave this strictly for Ecola Park, or should we be including in Fort Stevens as well? Are we doing a separate one for Fort Stevens?
I think that's the decision of the group to make a recommendation as to whether it should include just Ecola or both, or any other parks that we would choose to include. But
Andy?
yes, sir.
It's Harold. Maybe we ought to look at the federal list. They may already be there. And there's no need for us to duplicate. We could just check off what they already recognize for our use in Clatsop County as designation.
So I think this is one of those cases where Ecola Point is certainly in the national list. That this is a case where in the past goal and possibly in the goal going forward, that we're making special recognition, special dispensation for a particular park, that we have, special attention focusing on. I think especially contextually, and Robert, maybe you can speak to this, the Clatsop Plains recommendation specifies the kind of activities that we would be concerned with as a county, things having to do with the Chinook Nation. That may or may not be reflected with just the listing from the national site list. So that would be my take anyway as to why we would want to include it. Again, up to the group whether that's a valid take. That would be my interpretation. Robert?
I think you're spot on. Since the Chinook Nation is not federally recognized, that it's rather important that we make this kind of suggestion. It's not going to come from the top.
Thanks, Robert. Commissioner Webb.
Yeah, I'm wondering why there couldn't be something a little bit broader than this that is specific to state parks. Why couldn't we put a blanket entry that says that the county wants to work with federal and state parks to recognize the past cultural or the past uses of the property within that park by Native peoples, because of I mean, it's the parks are different one from another. They're different locations. And I think it's a very reasonable thing to just say, as a matter of policy, we want to sit down with the state and with the feds and talk about properly marking the existence of Native history and culture on their sites.
Jan.
I had written something before this discussion even, because I think it's important to give staff the resource. I mean, this policy will allow future commissions to write a letter to a state agency asking for cooperation, because you'll have the policy direction there. But I had put down Clatsop County shall work cooperatively with, and I put cities and we'd have to add in state and federal agencies, cities, the Clatsop County Historical Society, to protect and as possible enhance Chinook and Clatsop Nehalem Confederated Tribes sites within the county, something like that. That just means that when something is happening, the county staff or the county staff could bring something to the commission and say, hey, this is going on. We want to jump in and try to get people to work together to find the best solution to this. And you've got something in your document that allows that without having to go through our long discussion of it.
Jan, can you alter your Clatsop Nehalem phraseology?
Well, I would say Chinook Nation and Clatsop Nehalem Confederated Tribes. You've got to have both.
Why?
Because they are not one group. They don't see themselves as one group anymore. They weren't even one group when Lewis and Clark were here. And that's a longer discussion. But and I know you'll get pushback from the Chinook, but you can't have a marriage when one person says, I'm not married to you. And they are operating separately. The Clatsop Nehalem were in fact the ones who were on the ground in Clatsop County. It's a much longer discussion than we want to get into here, believe me.
So I'm at a bit of a loss here as to what to do with these recommendations. So we've got like you're suggesting language here that is pretty radically different from the policy that we're discussing. That's okay. You know, if we're replacing this policy with something entirely different, you know, that's at the leisure of the group. But you know, we're at this point going afield of just this one. If I'm not sure, yeah. Gail, I'll recognize you first.
Okay, so you can do both. You can make the amendment to policy 1 as was originally suggested, and you can add a brand new policy, including the language that Jan put forward. So you can do both.
I would completely agree that we can do both. I don't know what the group is asking for at the moment. That's my confusion. Jan, are you wanting a new goal to be inserted? Are you wanting to replace this one? What action are we looking for here?
Well, I guess I would just recommend that this is not an issue for one site. It is an issue definitely for Ecola Park, but it is an issue for more than one site in the county, and there is apt to be more than one agency involved. And so I would probably write a broader statement that would include include all the state sites and the agencies and groups that we need to work with for resolution if, you know, when something pops up. But I don't have any greater wisdom than staff on this side. I just know some of the groups involved.
Cheryl, did you have comment too?
I would like to hear the wording on Jan's proposal again, please. And right off the top of my head, the Clatsop Plains edition, I am in favor of, but I agree with Jan, it needs to include not only the Chinook Nation, but also the Clatsop Nehalem tribes. And then in addition to that, I would like to hear Gail's or Jan's motion again, please, or her proposal.
I'd like to hear from Gail what headaches that causes her, if that causes her problems. Okay, well then, you know, staff can rework this, but I said Clatsop County shall work cooperatively countywide with agencies, with state agencies, cities, the Clatsop County Historical Society, the Chinook Nation, the Clatsop Nehalem Confederated Tribes, to protect and as possible and possibly enhance cultural and historic sites. I don't know that you need the enhance, you know. It's maybe overreaching. Just stick to.
Jan, could you read the very last part again after the Clatsop
Yeah.
Nehalem Confederated Tribes
to protect cultural and historic sites.
Okay, so is it your intention on this one, Jan, that it would replace the existing language for policy 1?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second for Jan's motion to replace the existing language for policy 1 with the text seen in purple?
I move.
That was a second, Cheryl.
Okay.
Any discussion on the motion? I'll recognize Robert first, and then Robert, and then Cheryl, and then Commissioner Webb. Sorry, Commissioner, I'm just putting you off because you're a member of the public officially right now. Robert?
I simply wish that we had input from those two entities, the sovereign Chinook Indian Nation and the Clatsop Nehalem Confederated Tribes, as to what their, I wish we'd have current day input from those two entities before including them. You know, the last news I had was Old Daily Astorian article, which came after the event in which Jen was involved.
Thank you, Robert. Cheryl?
I think that I want to amend Jan's motion so that it would say to protect and recognize cultural historic sites. The wording on that first one was to give proper recognition. So I think we want to protect them and to give proper recognition. So depending on what Jan and the others think, we could amend that.
I would agree with that.
I'll take that as a second. Jan, is there any objection to us including recognition, protection and recognition? Is that the right language?
I like
Cheryl?
first and then protection just as the sequence, but I agree.
Is that a second?
Yes, to recognize and protect would be the way I would agree with everyone.
Is there a second for that order? Okay, Jan, I'm taking that as a second. Recognize and protect cultural and historic sites. So first we'll go for that order. Any objection to that order? Okay, any objection to including recognize? Okay, so back to the amended passage now. Any discussion on this whole passage? Jim?
Yes, the only question I have is that the term shall work. I mean, that's legally, that's extremely strong language. Is that something that it's a requirement of the county, but it's not a requirement of these other agencies to work with the county? My question is that too strong of a word and would get the county in trouble?
Shall seek to work cooperatively.
Yeah, you understand. I don't know the answer to it, but it's a question that I have in my mind.
Pat?
I mean, so shall seek to work cooperatively, might that clarify the intention?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the county is obligated to attempt to work,
Sorry,
but
Jim,
obviously can't force them to.
So I've got a motion. I'm taking that as a motion, Pat. Shall seek to work cooperatively. Jim, I'm taking you as a second. I'm railroading you all now because we're short on time. Shall seek to work cooperatively. Is there any objection to that addition? Hearing no objection, shall seek to work cooperatively is added. Thank you, Gail, for keeping up with us. Any discussion on the amended motion?
My intention will be to abstain out of ignorance on current situation. I have recently Googled hard about those entities like the Clatsop Nehalem and was not able to find much evidence of their currently being active.
Thank you, Robert. Jan?
I would just say, Robert, I even looked up Wikipedia, and there's a lengthy historic, and the information looks fairly solid to me. All we are saying is that we will consult with those groups. I can't see.
And does a letter group currently exist?
Yes. Yes.
I have not found it being currently active when I've recently Googled it.
You know Diane Collier from Warrenton? She's the,
And
she,
I've never made contact with her
And-
when we were deeding land.
and Dick Bash is the vice chair. And he was the liaison to the, for the National Park Service to the tribal groups across the country, just retired. So all we're doing is saying we will consult with them. And that to me is not much of a stretch.
Pat.
And I'd rather have more thems than fewer thems. I mean, if there's distinct names that would be recognized subsequently down the road, I'd rather have them be articulated now than not.
Commissioner Webb, did you have discussion?
Yeah, I think, Robert, if you'll look in the Astorian, you'll see that recently the North Coast Land Conservancy just actually returned a part of the original grounds held by the Nehalem, by the Clatsop Nehalem tribe. They're very active. They are a group.
Okay, so any further discussion? Jim?
Along the lines of whether they're recognized by who? Would it be clear if it's county recognized or locally recognized or something along those lines, so we don't get into any argument about what they're not federally recognized? That's the concern that I would have.
Is that a notion for an amendment, Jim, or do we?
Well, no, that's more of a question for the group, because I don't have an answer to that in terms of having specific names but no recognition, official recognition, at least at the federal level. I don't know if the state can recognize. I don't know if the county can recognize. How do we know who these groups are? In other words, legally.
Okay, Jan and Pat.
The only time you use the word recognized is with federal recognition. And so we can acknowledge that the groups are here, but I don't think we need to get into the use of the word recognized. The Chinook were recognized for about 2 weeks until President Bush unrecognized them. Believe me, it's a treacherous bog to wade into, and you're not going to keep everybody happy. When I worked with it, there was a council of tribal advisors across the country. They said, be inclusive. And that's what I was going to. We cannot decide whether they are valid or not. We just need to be inclusive.
Okay, I'm fine with the wording then.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Is there any objection to replacing policy 1 with the amended motion as written in purple?
I will abstain.
Thank you, Robert. I hear no objection, so we can replace that passage. Thank you, Gail. Okay, policy 2. Let's try to tackle this one. I will note we're running low on time, folks.
Woohoo! Policy 2.
So staff notes here that the canon mentioned in this policy 2 has already been moved to the Cannon Beach Historical Society, and staff recommendation is deletion of the goal. Is there anyone who wants to make that motion?
I move that this body delete the policy 2 in the current comprehensive plan.
I second. Todd seconds.
Thank you, Todd. Is there any objection to deleting policy 2? Hearing no objection, Gail, feel free to strike that one. Policy 3, County Parks Department.
We're going too fast. We're going too fast.
The County Parks Department, to the extent funding permits, will continue to maintain the Lindgren House. This is still an ongoing concern, is it not? Gail, yeah, okay. Is there anyone who wants to amend, change, or delete this passage?
Just to the extent funding permits, scratch that.
So, well, that would be interesting. Do you want to make that as a motion, Robert?
Yeah.
Robert moves to strike to the extent funding permits, comma, to the extent funding permits, comma. Is there a second to that motion? Robert, it seems to die for lack of a second.
Ooh.
Is there any other motion or discussion on policy 3? Okay, hearing none, policy 3 will be retained. Policy 4, relevant to the Falls Pulp Mill and the Shepherd and Morse Sawmill. Cheryl, did you have talking points to these? These are in your area, correct?
Correct. These are in our area. And we do think that it would be appropriate if commemorative plaques were placed there, at least at the Shepherd and Morris Sawmill. That's the one located in Westport, so that is in our area. And as far as Gail knows, nothing has been done. So if it's appropriate to keep these kind of specifics in a comprehensive land use plan, Northeast would like for it to be retained.
So just to restate, so that I get proper understanding here, it's the understanding of staff and the Northeast group that this has not happened as of yet, correct? Plaques do not exist. Okay, so Southwest group had a concern that maybe this was already done, but that seems to not be the case, correct? Yeah.
You know, I know clearly, because of its extreme importance as a fishery, the Chinook Indian Nation based at Bay Center, Washington, would like to be involved in this plaque wording.
Are you wanting to insert something about that, Robert, or?
If it seems, you know, the Falls Pulp Mill was at Youngs River Falls, which was widely recognized as a highly important salmon harvest location. You know, so it was a lot more important than the fact they had a pulp grinding mill there. So yeah, if someone else can wordsmith it, I'll ask Patrick to think up something.
And I'm struggling at the moment.
So let me suggest that we are not going to finish this today. So let's come back to that one for further wordsmithing, if we want to insert some more language. Pat, is that okay?
That sounds fine. Although the reason that I couldn't respond really to Robert's request was I'm still thinking about his previous motion that I almost seconded. I think maybe a request for staff is to actually this business of as funding allows. That's a really huge phrase, and almost everything we do in this comp plan will say as funding allows or kind of doesn't. And I guess I would look to see for some guidance about that. You know, maybe that kind of language in all the policies might need to be addressed forthrightly as, you know, if funding is available, or if we can take that out, because that is very powerful language about a shall or a maybe, and maybe that's why some of these things aren't done. So I don't think for this evening, but I guess, you know, that phrase is important down the line, and it has budgetary implications and all kinds of things. So go ahead. Yeah.
I think that's relevant to bring up in other sections. I will note that this one is encourages and not a shall or will. So it doesn't necessarily have the same import. Gail?
So I have a question that the people who have the historical knowledge may be able to answer, but if I understand correctly, wasn't the Lindgren cabin, it was moved from Soapstone Lake, I think, and it was privately owned, I believe, and I think the county may have been helping to maintain it. But it is now at Cullowhee Lake Park, and it is under the county Parks and Rec Department. So it may be that when that policy was written, that it wasn't yet under the complete control of the county Parks Department. So you may be
So
able to
that
take
distinction
out
might
previous
not be-
funding from it.
Thank you, Gail, for clarification there.
I would sure hate to see that phrase with every meaningful policy we assert.
Thanks, Pat. So I'm going to try to mentally remember, but Gail, perhaps you can put in a note that maybe we should come back to policy 4 for further discussion. Policy 5, Clatsop Plain Cemetery shall be protected from incompatible use by placing it in an open space parks and recreation zone. Staff note says that this has been completed. Can I get a motion to delete this section since it is no longer operable?
I move that the Community
So
Advisory
moved.
Committee. I second.
Okay. Cheryl and then Pat, thank you. Is there any objection to striking policy 5 as already in place? Jim, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Not necessarily to delete it at this point in time, but I do notice that, did know that there are a number of cemeteries listed in SHPO's list. And so we're saying that this specific cemetery will have more protection than the other historical cemeteries. Is that what we're saying?
That would
Yeah,
certainly be my reading by exclusion of the others. Yeah. Is there a historical reason that you know of for that, Gail, or anybody else on the?
Mr. Strickland.
Just, no, that, yeah, it was just the obvious one that someone had a serious interest in. You know, there are plenty of cemeteries. This one was just on 101 as you drive by.
I might suggest that if that's an appropriate way for us to protect cemeteries that we want, historical site cemeteries that we want protected, then we might want to change or insert a new policy to replace this one that refers to all cemeteries. But again, I think maybe we need to leave that for the next meeting.
It'd take more time because it's certainly spot zoning in many cases.
Gail, could I ask, could you add on page 42, the blue sheet, could you add just a line about historic cemeteries and whether we want to come back to that one?
We want to avoid getting into a case of spot zoning.
Thank you, Gail. So we're at a kind of strange point. We're almost to the public comment section of our agenda. I have gotten at least one message about a desire for public comment that I want to honor, and I think we're going to have a little bit of discussion on policy 6 because it's the recommendation is a language change. So I'm inclined for us to go to public comment and go toward wrapping up the meeting since we have a time constraint today. Is there any objection to us going to public comment at this point a minute early? No. So public comment period, we ask that folks limit their comments to 3 minutes. I'll keep time, but is there comment from the public?
Testing.
I hear you, Doug. Would you like to make your comment?
This is Doug Thompson, representing the Lower Columbia Preservation Society, LCPS, and I'm speaking to you today as a poor substitute for our executive director, Rachel Jensen, who is off on a well-deserved vacation. Let me just say that we would like to make some comments, but I'm heartened to hear that you're going to have another meeting. And in the interest of time, I could very easily shut up and wait for the next meeting. How's that?
Works all right for us. We appreciate you being here, Doug, and being flexible on that.
And hopefully at your next meeting, Rachel will be able to give the information. So thank you all for your work. It's been an interesting discussion. Thanks for your thoughtfulness, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Pat? Oh, okay. Gail, do you have closing comments or anything for next meeting?
So for our next meeting, then we'll pick up where we left off. And then we will also be covering next meeting, let's see, groundwater and watersheds. And there is going to be a workshop. The flyer just went out this afternoon on October 1st with watersheds and whatever the other thing was I mentioned. So we will have a couple of different opportunities to be talking about that. The other question I have is the LC Dual group has moved their meeting to 5 p.m. on the third Thursday to immediately follow ours. Do we feel that 3 hours is enough, or do we want to change our meeting time? Actually, 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Feedback from the group on that time?
I'd like to think it would provide a discipline for expediency, but I'm not sure.
I'm looking at how tired staff is looking and just wondering if it's reasonable to two meetings like this back to back. I regret that they kind of went ahead and scheduled their meeting, but I would be willing to move things or make them earlier or later, or so you staff is not doing 2 or 3 hour meetings right in a row. It's awful. We want you to stay here, Gail.
I'm flexible in terms of moving it if it helps the staff out.
Cheryl?
Me too.
Yeah, even if we could just shift it maybe half an hour and maybe start at 1:30 and then finish at 4:30, that would give at least time to go get a drink of water and get the next meeting up and running. So that would actually be very helpful. Thank you.
Gail, is it more problematic for us to move to 1?
Nope.
Is there any issue with the rest of the group if we move our slot from 1 to 4? Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you for your patience with us. Any other comments from the group before we close today?
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
I didn't railroad you guys nearly enough today. We ran over, so Cheryl.
Robert, we need to have a beer sometime.
Yes, dear.
Cheryl.
I thought it was helpful to have Commissioner Webb here. I know you have 8,000 meetings in your life, but anytime that you can sit in with us, this is very useful. None of us are land use planners. We do not, outside of Gail, have experience doing this necessarily. Well, Jan does, but the rest of us are neophytes in this. And I thought that your direction and your information was useful today. Please sit in with us whenever you can.
I second that.
Okay. Gail, we'll get you out of here with a minute to spare, I guess. Thank you for your patience with us. I think we've reached the end of the agenda. Thank you all. We can be adjourned for the day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.